Welcome to today's episode of the Normalized Surrogacy podcast by Surrogacy Mentor. I'm your host, Carrie Flamer Powell, and I am here with Marielle Schubert, the intake manager for Surrogacy Mentor and Modern Parent Mentor. Hello, Marielle.
Hello.
It's been a while since we've been together on a podcast, so this is fun.
Yeah.
A little throwback to the beginning days of our podcast. And we're also trying Google Meet instead of Zoom to record this because I like having the option of a fake background.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So we're going to try this and see how it goes. Today we are talking about, we're actually revisiting an old podcast topic that was popular and kind of fun, which is Shit Surrogates Here, Part 2. Or maybe this is Part 3, I'm not sure. But this is about crazy, wild things that surrogates hear from people when they find out they are a surrogate, and just general questions that people have that we have found humorous, interesting, or sometimes infuriating, and how we and others have handled those. So we went out into the interwebs and talked to experienced surrogates to get this list of questions, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So we went out and said, what are some of the things you've heard, whether they're crazy or funny or sad or whatever. What are some of the things you heard and what were your responses? So all of the things we're going to be talking about are real, from real people who've been surrogates, and how they've handled it. So let's talk about it. So I want to jump right in, Marielle, with the first crazy thing that a surrogate has heard.
Yes, and I can tell you from my own personal experience and reading through some of these, it never ceases to amaze me what people find it appropriate to say to other people, to pregnant people, and especially a pregnant surrogate. So we'll just preface this with that some of these are just they crack me up. So in one of the questions that we asked, it was, what's the most common question that you heard that kind of comes up repeatedly? And so one of the main themes that we see when we did our poll, and just from personal experience, was, aren't you worried about giving the baby away? How can you give away your own baby? I could never give away my baby like that. That was a very common one that we saw. A lot of surrogates said that they've heard, and I know I've heard that one a lot as well.
Yeah. So what has your response been to? So some of these we just asked the questions, and some of these they actually said, here's what I've been asked and here's how I answered it. So for this one, what have you said to people when they've said that to you?
It's not my baby. It never was my baby. I'm just giving it back. That was always my go-to response, was, I'm just growing it and giving it back. I'm not giving it up. I'm giving it back, was always my response, because I think that's the biggest misconception that people have about gestational surrogacy in general, is that it is your baby. It is not. It never was. There's no genetic tie, no genetic link. And so I always kind of turned the conversation into giving it back. I always kind of relate it to when people talk about adoption, and terminology is very important when talking about that. A lot of people who have done adoption, they're trying to change the language to, I didn't give my baby up for adoption, I placed them, right? That one word can be very important. I placed them, not gave them. So it's kind of the same thing. We got to start flipping this narrative, giving them back.
Right. And I think what might help people, the general public, to understand is this. So the general public, they're seeing or coming into this typically when they're talking to a surrogate who's pregnant or going to be pregnant or who was pregnant. So they're very focused, the person who doesn't know much about surrogacy, they're very focused on the pregnancy and the baby, right? Like in that moment of time. What I think is helpful is to explain to people, before this pregnancy happened, there were years, months for sure, years usually, years of pain and loss, or planning and financing and hoping and wishing and dreaming on the part of the parents to bring this process to fruition. What you need to understand, general public, is that this is a baby that was planned for, budgeted for, you know, all hoped for, all the things, right? And it is so much their baby, the parents' baby, before it's ever even a pregnancy. It is their hope, wish, and dreams in the form of an embryo at a fertility clinic before it's ever something that we're carrying as a pregnancy. So I don't think people understand how much attachment there is on the part of the parents to this child, to this idea of this child before it's a pregnancy. And so for surrogates, we have that perspective, right? And
Hmm.
people in this industry, professionals, we have that perspective of the entire journey. And so I think it helps people to understand, like, I'm just carrying this baby at this moment in time, but this has been years in the making. And these parents have been, they're biologically related, usually, unless a donor has been used on both sides, but biologically, legally, emotionally, all the things. This is their baby and has been for a very long time before I, as the surrogate, came into the picture.
Yep.
Right. And so I
Yep.
think that helps people to listen to stories of parents via surrogacy and what they went through to get to the point of having a surrogate pregnancy.
Yep.
Helps people go, oh, got it. You literally were just coming in at this moment in time to help this part of their process, but this child is part of a long process. And I
Yep.
think that helps people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So what's the next one?
Oh, the fun one, and I do have some answers on this one of how people did it. How much money are you making? The money question is always a fun one. That obviously there is compensation in most surrogacy cases, but that is not the motivating factor for women, and so it's almost offensive. I found it offensive when people would ask me that because, like, whoa, like that's kind of like low on the list here. There's about 5 other reasons why I'm doing this before that, but they always want to ask, and it's always an interesting.
So here's the thing about surrogacy compensation, right? So first of all, this was always my response. As soon as someone said, "So how much are you making?" and I would say, "Oh wait, I would love to answer that question, but first, how much do you make at your job? This
Yep.
isn't my job, but how much do you make? I'd like to know what your income is, and can you break it down for me? Like, can you show me a pay stub?" Like, get very invasive right back. And then they're like, "Oh wait, okay, I get why that's maybe not a great question to ask."
Yeah.
However, that is just me being a little bit petty and sarcastic, right? What I want to say about compensation and surrogacy in general is that it shouldn't be taboo in terms of talking about it and it being a thing that is accepted and understood, right?
Yep.
Because we in the United States are one of the only countries that allow for compensated surrogacy. And I think that it's a good thing. And so there should be open transparency about compensation in general. However, that doesn't mean that everyone is free to ask everyone, as every surrogate, okay, exactly how much are you making? Just the same as you wouldn't meet somebody at a party and say, "Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Carrie. How much do you make at your career or your
Exactly.
side gig, or how much money are you making in life?" Like, that is not something you normally ask people.
Yep.
So I think that being transparent and open in general is a good thing, but there's like a little bit of I don't know, common courtesy, I guess, around respecting people's privacy when it comes to money. And you mentioned something that is important, is that a little bit of that, aside from it just being finances are private, the other thing is that there's an assumption that when someone asks you immediately about the money, that they think that that's why you're doing this
Yep.
and that that's the main motivator. And that feels insulting.
Yep.
Like, if we've talked about this before, if you break it down by the hour, most surrogates are averaging less than $2 an hour over the course of their journey. This is not a money making scheme. Nobody's life is changing dramatically.
Yep.
Yes, the compensation helps. Yes, the compensation is deserved. Yes, the compensation could do great things for you and your family, but it is not going to monumentally, foundationally change your status in life at
Yep.
$2 an hour average, right?
Yep. Yep, exactly. And I think that is one of the things, like it could and should help your family. You can do something great for you and your family while doing something great for somebody else. It should be talked about. It shouldn't be taboo. But yes, this assumption that and I think it's a time and place by, kind of who's asking you and how they're asking. I think tone is a big factor here too, in how you respond. And I think, I've done 3 surrogacy journeys, so I've heard it so many times in so many
Yeah.
different ways that I know personally I always kind of get side-eyed right away, just because asked and
Hmm.
answered. But I understand a lot of times people don't mean to be offensive about it. They
Right.
just don't know. They're coming from a place of just lack of knowledge. And so keeping
Right.
that in mind as well. But some of these women here have some pretty funny responses. One woman says, "Money? Wait, we get paid for this?" And she said the look on the guy's face was priceless.
That's funny.
Another one here, I just ask how much they make at their job. It's not exactly the same, but they get the idea.
Hmm.
Let's see. You can help someone grow their family and be compensated. It's no less of a beautiful gift in my mind, anyways.
Hmm. Well, and
So
I think you made a good point too when you said tone. It's like, if I'm just like at the grocery store and somehow a random person is like, "How much do you make?" That's going to be super offensive. And it's because it's very different than if like a friend or a family member is asking me all sorts of questions about the journey, and then compensation happens to be one of them.
yep,
That's completely fine. Of course, I understand that. But it's, are you taking a genuine interest in the process of surrogacy and what I'm experiencing and what it's really all about? Or are you just trying to get to like, you're doing this for the money, how much are you making? And is it really worth it for that amount of money? Like that
yep,
kind of a judgment. I think that's where people get a little prickly about it. But in general, I just want to say that I do think that compensation in surrogacy has been kind of a taboo thing in the past. And everyone that's been a surrogate will tell you they are not doing this primarily for the money. The money is great, it's deserved, it helps, but it is not and cannot be the main motivating factor, because if a good agency is doing their job and a good therapist is doing their job on the psych eval, they're going to figure out if a person is mainly money motivated, and that person will be screened out.
yep,
So,
yep.
anyway. All right, what's another one?
Let's see. Why would you ruin your body for someone else?
Well, I guess the assumption is that pregnancy ruins bodies, first of all. I mean, I have had 2 pregnancies. I don't feel like my body's ruined. Do you feel like yours is ruined after, what, 5 pregnancies?
Mine had some wear, shall we
Well, you
say.
carried twins once or
I
twice.
carried twins and one 9-pound boy after that. So I
Yeah,
had my ab muscle split. But at no point did I think it was ruined. It was just part of the process. And at no point was I ever, oh, I don't know if I should do this because it's going to ruin my body. It's just kind of, if it happens, what's another stretch mark? So
right.
I didn't say it's ruined, but I definitely have my battle wounds from my pregnancies and I wear them with pride.
Yeah. So what did some of the respondents say to that question?
She said she just laughed and rolled her eyes. That's what she said.
I
Um,
mean, I think it's interesting that people automatically assume that you're ruining your body with a pregnancy. I guess I get the intent behind it, which is pregnancy is hard on your body. It does change your body, some people more than others. And why would you want to go through that for another person? So what is your answer to that?
Well, my answer to that is that it the good that you're doing for somebody else and the love that you're bringing into the world far outweighs the stretch mark or the extra pooch that comes with pregnancy. Like that's just part of being a childbearing woman, I guess. And I think if since you've already gone through pregnancy, you kind of know what to expect with that. And for those of us who enjoy pregnancy and are looking into surrogacy, that idea is already so far from our mind that we're not thinking of what this is going to do to our body, because it's part of the process. It's part of being pregnant and things like that. And I think another misconception within some of that is that some parents choose surrogacy to avoid, quote, wrecking their bodies, and that they're doing this so they don't have to do that. And that's not a thing either. Nobody's choosing to find a surrogate just because they don't want to, quote, get fat or get a stretch mark or something like that. And I think that comes from so much of this kind of part of society that, these beauty standards that people, when it comes to having a family, so many people are so desperate for their baby, they don't care. And frankly, a lot of them wish they could have those stretch marks and those little leftovers from knowing what their body has gone through to get their babies. And so I also think it's, like I said, I take offense to it just because I feel bad for all of the people who can't carry and who would give anything to have their, quote, body ruined by a pregnancy. And that it's just, again, it's one of those things that just, boy, the things people think is are appropriate to say to other people sometimes just never cease to amaze me.
Yeah, I think that people don't quite understand that you have to have had really healthy pregnancies to go through this. And so obviously surrogates understand what it's like to be pregnant. They've been pregnant, they've had healthy pregnancies, and so the risks are low with a surrogate in terms of any sort of complications. But then physically, yeah, I think if you are having your own children or going through pregnancy as a surrogate, you already know the risks of what it could do to your body, like cosmetically, physically, the
Yep.
stretch marks, the extra weight, the potential, especially if you're carrying twins, for more stress on your body, and all of the other things are worth going through that. And I mean, I was 37 when I was a surrogate, and so I definitely thought about, what is pregnancy going to do to my body, as they say, geriatric pregnancy.
Yep.
Anything over 35 is geriatric. um and he was over 9 pounds, and so it was definitely a lot on my body, but completely worth it,
Worth
right?
it.
All the I
Yep.
never I don't I don't look back on that and think that my body was ruined in any way. So,
Yep.
all right, what else you got?
Let's see. So I've got a couple other comments here, and I think these ones will be good to kind of myth bust a couple of these along the same lines here. One person on here says that the baby will suffer and long to smell the person who grew it. Okay.
What is that?
And another one here, won't this baby be confused because you're the only person it's ever known, the only voice it's ever known, that you're damning this baby to a life of confusion?
Yeah, we get that one a lot on on our Facebook page. So I have to delete at least, a handful of comments every day, because people say, and it goes back to this theory called the mother wound that a lot of people use also for adoption, right? They call it the mother wound, the birth wound, whatever, which is this theory that if a child is brought into the world by one person and then, quote unquote, ripped away from that person and given to another, then that baby is always going to have a wound of being separated from the, quote unquote, mother that
Mhm.
birthed them. So obviously the dynamics of gestational surrogacy and adoption are completely different,
Yep.
biology being the main thing. But the mother wound has been disproven time and time again as studies have followed these children who grow into adults and how this affected them. Is that to say that there is no impact whatsoever? Who knows, right? I mean, surrogacy is relatively new, but I can tell you 10 years out from my surrogacy journey that the little guy that I had has a amazing connection bond with his parents, with his family, with his social circle. He is a thriving, happy, connected, unwounded child.
Yep.
And I think that the overwhelming majority of um, surrogacy cases, that is the case. I think that this comes from the adoption stigma where so many adoptions were closed, secretive. The children were never told that they
Yep.
were adopted and they have to find out as an adult or by accident. And then that creates a psychological wound of identity crisis. So I think that's where this comes from. And
Yep.
it's kind of outdated and not applicable. So
Yep.
what did some of the other surrogates say to that?
They agreed in some of this. I've also gotten the why can't I adopt? She says, as an adoptee myself, I explain the best I can for them that, it's not a matter of, let's see, being able to adopt. Sometimes people can't adopt, and it's their own baby, so they're not missing their biology. Sometimes, a lot of times, they're going back to biological uh, parents anyhow, and this really just comes down to misunderstandings, misconceptions. As you said earlier in this recording, these babies are so wanted and so loved before they even come out of the petri dish, so to speak, that a lot of these issues, they're not issues.
Well, this
It's
whole thing with the why don't you just adopt? That's a completely different one. So to close the mother wound one first, that one, I think that, you know, you just have to talk to children as they grow up from who are born of surrogacy and
Yep.
talk to them. Then there are young adults now who were born of gestational surrogacy, and they talk about their experiences and listen to some of those stories and ask them, do you feel like you have a wound from not being raised by the person who birthed you, even though they're not your biological parent?
Yep.
Um, so I think that you will find in reality that that myth does not hold water. So the whole why didn't the parents just adopt? That's very common question that surrogates get, right? Like,
Yep.
you're carrying a biological child for them. They went through IVF and all this expense and everything to have this child. Why didn't they just adopt? There's so many children available for adoption. First of all, first of all, let's reframe this experience. Would you, let's say you were at dinner with your sister and her husband, and they just told you they're pregnant with their first child, right? They didn't go through IVF or anything. They just, quote unquote, naturally got pregnant the old fashioned way with their first child. Would your first question or your second question or your 100th question to them be, why didn't you just adopt? There are so many children out there waiting to be adopted, and you're bringing another child into the world. Why didn't you just adopt? You would never ask somebody that
Nope.
because why? Because it is assumed that having a child, quote unquote, naturally is the way to do things. That is natural, that is normal. And if it's not on this heteronormative traditional way of having children, then it must be something that doesn't really need to happen. And that is not true. You
Exactly.
are, as a human, given the right to form your family in the way that feels right for you and is the way that you choose. So, if that's surrogacy, if that's adoption, if that's foster care, if that's not having children, if that's quote unquote traditional way,
Yep.
however you form your family is your business. Surrogacy just happens to be one of those paths.
Yep.
So I think if we ask people to reframe that, and most of the people asking these questions had their children or were born of the quote unquote natural traditional way.
Yep.
and ask them to reframe it and put the question back on them. Well,
Yep.
wait, why didn't you just adopt?
Exactly. When you say a choice, for some, it's not. Adoption is not always a choice for everyone. It's not always an option for everyone, even if they wanted to pursue that as the route. Some countries, adoption, if you are a gay couple, is not legal.
Right.
Sometimes, there are rules for how long you have to be in remission from cancer before you are eligible to adopt. There are certain
Right.
instances where it's not even an option. Not that it's anybody's business whether it is or is not, but to presume that everybody has the same options, again, just comes down to just lack of knowledge and people not
Right.
fully understanding the whole process. And
Right.
like I said, when it comes down to it, none of your business anyways. But
Right.
not
Right.
everybody has all the same options as everybody else does either. So
Absolutely. Not everyone has the same options. And adoption is not easy. Adoption is still relatively expensive. Adoption is a grueling process, often takes years, and still is in the many tens of thousands of dollars after all things considered. And the overwhelming majority of adoptions these days, thankfully, in my opinion, are open adoptions. And so a family that chooses adoption as their path, which is a beautiful path, also needs to be open to having a continued relationship with the birth family and the birth parents. And some families emotionally aren't able to do that for whatever reason. And so, or logistically able to do that. And so there are many, many reasons why adoption is not the chosen path for many people.
yep.
Right. And so I think that, again, this is about reframing, and it's almost like people who do surrogacy, whether as a surrogate or as parents, are viewed as people who are doing something outside of the norm, which is therefore optional. I'm trying to find the word. It it's not normal, quote unquote. It's not usual. It's not traditional. Therefore, it must not really be necessary. There's got to be other ways you could do this. And
Yep.
that's why this is called the Normalized Surrogacy Podcast, is because people need to understand that surrogacy is a normal part of family building, just like adoption, just like having your own kids, just like foster care. It's just a path, right? And
Yep.
we need to get people to stop seeing it as other than and as extracurricular or extra. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's not up for debate anymore.
Yep, it's not. And I think that's a perfect lead into some other comments here that I've seen a couple of times, and I know that I got, which was I got told I couldn't be a good Christian girl because surrogacy is a sin, and that surrogacy is from the devil, and it's a demonic thing, and
Sorry.
whew, I know that's a doozy. And you know what? If that is wrong, I will happily rejoice with my people wherever that is. I don't want to be with somebody who feels that way.
Yeah. So we did an episode on surrogacy and religion because it's come up this year. Excuse me. Come up this year that the Pope has denounced not just surrogacy, but IVF in general.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did an episode on religion and surrogacy and how it's played out in the court systems with IVF and personhood bills. So we did an earlier episode of this podcast on religion, and I encourage people to listen to it because we talk about all the ways that surrogacy is judged religiously. And it's so funny because there we tend to think in America very Christian centralized, but there are many, many, many religions in the world, and many of them view surrogacy as normal and natural and a part of their history as far back as the Bible and pre-Bible. And so I think it's a cop out for a lot of people,
Yep.
honestly. Just like people who don't agree with LGBTQ, just like people who don't agree with fill in the blank. Religion can be a cop out. Now, I say this with respect for the fact that everyone has the right to their religious beliefs.
Mhm.
But that's where it ends. You have a right to your religious belief, but you don't have a right to infringe upon my rights with your beliefs, right? So anyone that I don't even know if anyone ever came to me with a religious opposition, because anybody that knows me knows that would be a really bad idea.
Yep.
But um, I think that in general, people who go into surrogacy understand why we're doing this, and that at the heart of it, it's about love, and it's about service, and it's about giving of ourselves. And there is nothing that could be more Christian or loving or spiritual than that.
Yep. Absolutely. Mic drop on that one, because it's not, and it's just, and again, I just could never imagine saying that to somebody, like, it's okay to have inside thoughts sometimes, people, and when it comes
Mhm.
to things like this, not
Yeah.
appropriate. And you're telling me, while I'm huge and pregnant, that I am going to hell, as is this baby that I'm carrying, for this loving family who wants nothing. And who's the part of my friend? Who's the asshole now? Really? You're going to tell me that this is wrong? Wow. And by the way, it's a little late now. So thank you. Like, it's just not okay. And
Well,
I hate that it
yes.
wasn't the only me that heard that it's a somewhat common thing that people hear. It's just not
I
okay.
think that there are people that hear it, but I think that when I say cop out, what I mean is what people are really saying when they say stuff like that, in my opinion, when they say, you're going to hell, this is a sin, blah, blah, blah. To me, what they're saying is, what you're doing confuses me. What you're doing kind of scares me. What you're doing is something I don't understand. It doesn't fit within my worldview. And therefore, I reject it. And I'm going to fall back on what I view as the rules, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's what I'm going to use to justify my discomfort and my fear. And you could use that same exact analogy for religious opposition to LGBTQ and trans rights and
Yep.
all the things, right? I am scared, I am uncomfortable, I don't understand it. So I'm going to make sure that you understand that I don't agree with it, and I'm going to do that within the context of religion.
Yep.
And so I think that surrogates of faith, whether that's Christian or some other faith, I can confidently say that the surrogates that I have met, that I know, who come to surrogacy with a strong faith. Again, I don't equate faith with Christianity. That is not my worldview. Um, Faith can be many religions, it can be many spiritualities. The women that I know who have come to surrogacy with a strong faith have done extensive research and talking to the people in their church and their clergy and their circle of support to talk through all the things that they might be concerned about within their own faith. And then they've come to a decision in conjunction with the people that are important to them in their life and their religion, that this is something that is good and should be done knowing that they have the full support of their circle, right? And so hopefully that helps people, surrogates, know when they get these kinds of comments that they are supported within their religion and their circle, and the other people's beliefs are just that. They're just
Yep.
beliefs. And
Exactly.
that's where it ends.
Yep. And just take comfort in knowing that if you feel like you are doing a good thing, and this is what I would have to tell my religious in-laws, you are not the ultimate judge here. If we're going to rely on you and your faith, we will all be judged when that day comes, and it is not for you to pass that judgment on to me. So if you
Mhm.
don't think this is good, don't carry a baby for somebody else. If you don't
Right.
think, same thing with other rights. If you don't believe in gay marriage, don't marry a woman. You'll be
Yeah.
fine. And
Right.
that's fine. Don't do Keep on moving, and we'll be judged when the time comes by the appropriate powers that be, so to speak. You don't need
Mhm.
to take that upon yourself. Let it rest. And
Yeah.
so that one is definitely a common one. Let's see, what else do we see here? Surrogacy is human trafficking.
Oh my gosh. We get that on our Facebook page for Surrogacy Mentor like at least 5 times a week. Like you're trafficking children, you're exploiting women, you're forcing these women to have babies for profit. And we've had this conversation before, but I am the most bleeding heart liberal feminist. We have an episode of the podcast on feminism and surrogacy.
Yep.
I'm the most feminist feminism of the feminists. And there is nothing more feminist to me and more pro child to me than surrogacy. And it is the ultimate expression of bodily autonomy that a surrogate chooses to do this for somebody else with her body.
Yep.
And as far as the child trafficking, oy vey, like science. All I can say is it's science. Like someone has gone through IVF to create an embryo that is then gestated by a woman who can carry that embryo successfully and in a healthy way. And then the baby's born, like, and given to their parents. They are not taken to some third world country and sold on a black market. Like, that's
Nope.
not what's happening here. And I'm not
Nope.
sure where the child trafficking comes from. If they think that people are just like signing up on a black market list to have a kid, and then we're just like rotating women through to have these kids and then shipping them off to whatever country the parents are in. Like, it's this strange world that people live in their heads. And I don't think they understand that it's not reality. And I don't know where they're getting this from, but I do hear it a lot. So it's an interesting comment
Yep.
for sure. And I do think that a lot of that comes from other countries. There are unfortunately countries that have had issues with kind of running baby mills and running in other countries, not in the US, but running situations where the women don't have as much autonomy over their bodies and their decisions. And those are things to be concerned about. That is not how it's done here.
No.
There's so many safeguards in place here that protect all parties legally, emotionally, financially.
Yep.
And that is why people come to the United States to have their surrogacy when they could go to another country for a third of the cost. But
Yep.
they don't feel comfortable doing it in those countries because of the way things are done and the way the women are treated or the way the process is done. They come here because we have ethics and we have standards.
Yep.
And that's important,
Absolutely.
I think, for people to understand. And so a good resource for that, which I'm speaking now with my hat on as the co-vice president of SEEDS, which is the Society for Ethics in Egg Donation and Surrogacy. The website is seedsethics.org, which we will link here in this podcast. Go to the SEEDS website, learn about what ethics we as an industry are self-regulating with and putting into place to make sure that we are doing everything we can to do things in an ethical way that protects women, children, families. And I think people will hopefully be educated that this is not a child traffic ring
Yep.
at all.
Yep. It just doesn't happen. I think I did a TikTok video replying to somebody's comment on this about child trafficking and like if you look up the definition of that, it is in no way close to what gestational surrogacy is, but that again kind of comes down to education and normalizing what this is, so that way people don't only have these wild, third world country ideas or Lifetime movie ideas of what gestational surrogacy is. As gestational surrogates, we are not impoverished women who are being pimped out for our uteruses. We are also not living with our intended parents, trying to steal away the husband and run away with this magical family. I mean, that's not what it is. Although it does make for a very intriguing movie, that's not what it is, and that's not our reality as surrogates in the United States. It's just not.
Right. Yes.
And then I guess we can end on one last funny one here. a Facebook poster says, when at my anatomy scan, explaining to the technician how it works because he had a lot of questions and reassuring him that the IPs were very involved in the process, he said, well, you get paid either way, whether they show up or not. She said, sir, I never returned to that OB office.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that all goes back to the idea of we're just doing it for the money, right? Like people really think that we're just literally spending 2 years of our life and our family's life just for what equates to, a couple dollars an hour over the course of a couple years. It's interesting to me that people don't do the math and go, wait a minute, I wouldn't take I wouldn't take that much time and effort away from my own family for that amount of money. Why would I think they would go through this type of a thing for that amount? It
Yep.
doesn't equate. I mean, people don't understand the average compensation for a surrogate. They think in their mind it's like two, three, four, $500,000 or something.
Yep.
It's not. It's
Nope.
not. And even if it was, like, I don't get that people think that we're just out here just, doing this for the money. It's really strange to me.
Yep.
I don't get it. I don't get it. That's funny. Well, I think that as many surrogates listening can vouch, and parents too, I think our next episode needs to be things parents hear. And
Yes.
I have a couple parents that would be great to have on the podcast for that. And if you're listening, or if you're an intended parent, if you want to email us at hello@surrogacymentor.com and send us the crazy things that you have heard. There's also a new feature on our podcast on the episode that says send us a text message. You can send us your feedback or your questions about any episode right from the link, and we'll get that. But tell us the things that you've heard as a parent or an intended parent when it comes to the surrogacy process, because there's a whole other side, and it's what parents hear. And I
Yeah,
think that would be an interesting topic for next time.
absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Marielle, for being with me. It was good to be on another episode with you again. And I look forward to the next episode.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So that brings us to the end of this episode of the Normalized Surrogacy podcast. We want to thank you for taking time to listen. And if you would like to know if surrogacy might be right for you, visit us online at surrogacymentor.com. Take the 2-minute surrogacy quiz to see if you qualify. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast to learn more about how to have a safe, ethical, and enjoyable surrogacy journey. Talk to you next time.
Music bed.
Now navigating the new